Section 13 of Three Soldiers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by M.B. Three Soldiers by John Dos Passos. Section 13. 2. Two MPs passed outside the window. Andrews watched the yellow pigskin revolver cases until they were out of sight. He felt joyfully secure from them. The waiter, standing by the door with a napkin on his arm, gave him a sense of security so intense it made him laugh. On the marble yellow table before him were a small glass of beer, a notebook full of ruled sheets of paper, and a couple of yellow pencils. The beer, the color of topaz in the clear grey light that streamed in through the window, threw a pale yellow glow with a bright center on the table. Outside was the boulevard with a few people walking hurriedly. An empty market wagon passed now and then, rumbling loud. On a bench a woman in a black knitted shawl, with a bundle of newspapers on her knees, was counting sous with loving concentration. Andrews looked at his watch. He had an hour before going to the Schola Cantorum. He got to his feet, paid the waiter and strolled down the center of the boulevard, thinking smilingly of pages he had written, of pages he was going to write, filled with a sense of leisurely well-being. It was a grey morning with a little yellowish fog in the air. The pavements were damp, reflected women's dresses and men's legs and the angular outlines of taxicabs. From a flower stand with violets and red and pink carnations, irregular blotches of color ran down the brownish grey of the pavement. Andrews caught a faint smell of violets in the smell of the fog as he passed the flower stand, and remembered suddenly that spring was coming. He would not miss a moment of this spring, he told himself. He would follow it step by step from the first violets. Oh, how fully he must live now to make up for all the years he had wasted in his life. He kept on walking along the boulevard. He was remembering how he and the girl the soldier had called Jeanne had both kindled with uncontrollable laughter when their eyes had met that night in the restaurant. He wished he could go down the boulevard with a girl like that, laughing through the foggy morning. He wondered vaguely what part of Paris he was getting to, but he was too happy to care. How beautifully long the hours were in the early morning. At a concert at the Salle Gaveau the day before, he had heard Debussy's Nocturne and Les Sirenes. Rhythms from them were the warp of all his thoughts. Against the background of the grey street and the brownish fog that hung a veil at the end of every vista, he began to imagine rhythms of his own, modulations and phrases that grew brilliant and faded, that flapped for a while like gaudy banners above his head through the clatter of the street. He noticed that he was passing a long building with blank rows of windows, at the central door of which stood groups of American soldiers smoking. Unconsciously he hastened his steps, for fear of meeting an officer he would have to salute. He passed the men without looking at them. A voice detained him. "Say, Andrews!" When he turned he saw that a short man with curly hair, whose face, though familiar, he could not place, had left the group at the door and was coming towards him. "Hello, Andrews. Your name's Andrews, ain't it?" "Yes." Andrews shook his hand, trying to remember. "I'm Fuselli. Remember? The last time I saw you I was goin' up to the lines on a train with Chrisfield. Chris, we used to call him. At Cosne, don't you remember?" "Of course I do. Well, what's happened to Chris?" "He's a corporal now," said Andrews. "Gee, he is? I'll be goddamned. They was going to make me a corporal once." Fuselli wore stained olive drab breeches and badly rolled puttees. His shirt was open at the neck. From his blue denim jacket came a smell of stale grease that Andrews recognized, the smell of army kitchens. He had a momentary recollection of standing in line cold dark mornings and of the sound of food made slopping into mess kits. "Why didn't they make you a corporal, Fuselli?" Andrews said after a pause in a constrained voice. Hell, I got in wrong, I suppose." They were leaning against the dusty house wall. Andrews looked at his feet. The mud of the pavement, splashing up on the wall, made an even dado along the bottom, on which Andrews scraped the toe of his shoe up and down. "Well, how's everything?" Andrews said, looking up suddenly. "I've been in a labor battalion. That's how everything is." "Oh, God, that's tough luck." Andrews wanted to go on. He had a sudden fear that he would be late. But he did not know how to break away. "I got sick," said Fuselli, grinning. "I guess I am yet. Go 42. It's a hell of a note the way they treat a feller. Like he was lower than the dirt. Were you at Cosne all the time? That's damned rough luck, Fuselli." "Cosne sure is a hell of a hole. I guess you saw a lot of fighting. God, you must have been glad not to be in the goddam medics." "I don't know that I'm glad I saw fighting. Oh, yes, I suppose I am. You see, I had it a hell of a time before they found out. Court-martial was damn stiff. After the armistice, too. Oh, God, why can't they let a fellow go home?" A woman in a bright blue hat passed them. Andrews caught a glimpse of a white, overpowdered face. Her hips trembled like jelly under the blue skirt with each hard clack of her high heels on the pavement. "Gee, that looks like Jenny. I'm glad she didn't see me," Fuselli laughed. "Ought to have seen her one night last week. We were so dead drunk we just couldn't move. Isn't that bad for what's the matter with you?" "I should give a damn now. What's the use?" "But God, man." Andrews stopped himself suddenly. Then he said in a different voice: "What outfit are you in now?" "I'm on the permanent K.P. here." Fuselli jerked his thumb towards the door of the building. "Not a bad job. Off 2 days a week. No drill, good eats. At least you get all you want. But it surely has been hell emptying ash cans and shoveling coal, and now all they've done is dry me up. But you'll be going home soon now, won't you? They can't discharge you till they cure you." "Damned if I know. Some guys say a guy never can be cured." "Don't you find K.P. work pretty damn dull?" "No worse than anything else. What are you doing in Paris?" "School detachment." "Oh, what's that?" "Men who wanted to study in the university, who managed to work it." "Gee, I'm glad I ain't going to school again." "Well, so long, Fuselli." "So long, Andrews." Fuselli turned and slouched back to the group of men at the door. Andrews hurried away. As he turned the corner he had a glimpse of Fuselli with his hands in his pockets and his legs crossed, leaning against the wall behind the door of the barracks. 3. The darkness, where the rain fell through the vague halos of light round the street lamps, glittered with streaks of pale gold. Andrews's ears were full of the sound of racing gutters and spattering waterspouts, and of the hard, unceasing beat of the rain on the pavements. It was after closing time. The corrugated shutters were drawn down in front of cafe windows. Andrews's cap was wet. Water trickled down his forehead and the sides of his nose, running into his eyes. His feet were soaked, and he could feel the wet patches growing on his knees where they received the water running off his overcoat. The street stretched wide and dark ahead of him, with an occasional glimmer of greenish reflection from a lamp. As he walked, splashing with long strides through the rain, he noticed that he was keeping pace with a woman under an umbrella, a slender person who was hurrying with small, resolute steps up the boulevard. When he saw her, a mad hope flamed suddenly through him. He remembered a vulgar little theatre in the crude light of a spotlight. Through the paint and powder a girl's golden brown skin had shone with a firm brilliance that made him think of the wide, sun-scorched uplands and dancing figures on Greek vases. Since he had seen her 2 nights ago, he had thought of nothing else. He had feverishly found out her name. Naya Selikov. A mad hope flared through him that this girl he was walking beside was the girl whose slender limbs moved in an endless frieze through his thoughts. He peered at her with eyes blurred with rain. What an ass he was. Of course it couldn't be. It was too early. She was on stage at this minute. Other hungry eyes were staring at her slenderness, other hands were twitching to stroke her golden brown skin. Walking under the steady downpour that stung his face and ears and sent a tiny cold trickle down his back, he felt a sudden dizziness of desire come over him. His hands, thrust to the bottom of his coat pockets, clutched convulsively. He felt that he would die, that his pounding blood vessels would burst. The bead curtains of rain rustled and tinkled about him, awakening his nerves, making his skin flash and tingle. In the gurgle of water in the gutters and waterspouts, he could imagine he heard orchestras droning libidinous music. The feverish excitement of his senses began to create frenzied rhythms in his ears. "Oh, ce pauvre poilu, qu'il doit être mouillé," said a small tremulous voice beside him. He turned. The girl was offering him part of her umbrella. "Oh, c'est un Américain," she said again, still speaking as if to herself. "Mais ça ne vaut pas la peine." "Mais oui, mais oui." He stepped under the umbrella beside her. "But you must let me hold it." "Bien." As he took the umbrella he caught her eye. He stopped still in his tracks. "But you're the girl at the Rat qui Danse." "And you were at the next table with the man who sang." "How amusing." "Et celui-là, oh, il était rigolo." She burst out laughing. Her head, encased in a little round black hat, bobbed up and down under the umbrella. Andrews laughed too. Crossing the Boulevard St. Germain, a taxi nearly ran them down and splashed a great wave of mud over them. She clutched his arm and then stood roaring with laughter. "Oh, quelle horreur! Quelle horreur!" she kept exclaiming. Andrews laughed and laughed. "But hold the umbrella over us. You're letting the rain in on my best hat," she said again. "Your name is Jeanne," said Andrews. "Impertinent! You heard my brother call me that. He went back to the front last night, poor little chap. He's only 19. He's very clever. Oh, how happy I am that the war's over." "You're older than he?" "2 years. I am the head of the family. It is a dignified position." "Have you always lived in Paris?" "No, we are from Laon. It's the war." "Refugees?" "Don't call us that. We work." Andrews laughed. "Are you going far?" she asked, peering in his face. "No, I live up here. My name is the same as yours." "Jean? How funny. Where are you going?" "Rue Descartes, behind Saint Etienne." "I live near you." "Ah, but you mustn't come. The concierge is a tigress. Etienne calls her Madame Clemenceau." "Who, the saint?" "No, you silly. My brother. He's a socialist. He's a typesetter at l'Humanité." "Really? I often read l'Humanité." "Poor boy, he used to swear he'd never go in the army. He thought of going to America." "That wouldn't do him any good now," said Andrews bitterly. "What do you do?" "I?" A gruff bitterness came into her voice. "Why should I tell you?" I work at a dressmaker's." "Like Louise?" "You've heard Louise? Oh, how I cried." "Why did it make you sad?" "Oh, I don't know." "But I'm learning stenography." "But here we are." The great bulk of the Pantheon stood up dimly through the rain beside them. In front the tower of Saint Etienne du Mont was still visible. The rain roared about them. "Oh, how wet I am," said Jeanne. "Look, they are giving Louise day after tomorrow at the Opera Comique. Won't you come with me?" "No, I should cry too much." "I'll cry too." But it's not..." "C'est l'armistice," interrupted Andrews. They both laughed. "All right. Meet me at the cafe at the end of the Boul' Mich' at 7:15. But you probably won't come." "I swear I will," cried Andrews eagerly. "We'll see." She darted away down the street beside Saint Etienne du Mont. Andrews was left alone amid the seethe of the rain and the tumultuous gurgle of waterspouts. He felt calm and tired. When he got to his room he found he had no matches in his pocket. No light came from the window through which he could hear the hissing clamor of the rain in the court. He stumbled over a chair. "Are you drunk?" came Walters's voice, swathed in bedclothes. "There are matches on the table." "But where the hell's the table?" At last his hand, groping over the table, closed on the matchbox. The match's red and white flicker dazzled him. He blinked his eyes. The lashes were still full of raindrops. When he had lit a candle and set it amongst the music papers upon the table, he tore off his dripping clothes. "I just met the most charming girl, Walters." Andrews stood naked beside the pile of his clothes, rubbing himself with a towel. "Gee, I was wet. But she was the most charming person I've met since I've been in Paris." "I thought you said you let the girls alone." "Whores, I must have said." "Well, any girl you could pick up on the street." "Nonsense." "I guess they are all that way in this damned country. God, it will do me good to see a nice sweet wholesome American girl." Andrews did not answer. He blew out the light and got into bed. "But I've got a new job," Walters went on. "I'm working in the school detachment office." "Why the hell do that? You came here to take courses in the Sorbonne, didn't you?" "Sure, I go to most of them now. But in this army I like to be in the middle of things, see? Just so they can't put anything over on me." "There's something in that." "There's a damn lot in it, boy. The only way is to keep in right and not let the man higher up forget you. Why, we may start fighting again. These damn Germans ain't showing the right spirit at all. After all the President's done for them. I expect to get my sergeantcy out of it anyway." "Well, I'm going to sleep," said Andrews sulkily. John Andrews sat at a table outside the Cafe de Rohan. The sun had just set on a ruddy afternoon, flooding everything with violet blue light and cold greenish shadow. The sky was bright lilac color, streaked with a few amber clouds. The lights were on in all the windows of the Magasin du Louvre opposite, so that the windows seemed bits of polished glass in the afterglow. In the colonnade of the Palais Royal the shadows were deepening and growing colder. A steady stream of people poured in and out of the metro. Green buses stuffed with people kept passing. The roar of the traffic and the clatter of footsteps and the grumble of voices swirled like dance music about Andrews's head. He noticed all at once that the rabbit man stood in front of him, a rabbit dangling forgotten at the end of its rubber tube. "Et ça va bien, le commerce?" said Andrews. "Quietly, quietly," said the rabbit man, distractedly making the rabbit turn a somersault at his feet. Andrews watched the people going into the metro. "The gentleman amuses himself in Paris?" asked the rabbit man timidly. "Oh, yes, and you?" "Quietly," the rabbit man smiled. "Women are very beautiful at this hour of the evening," he said again in his very timid tone. "There is nothing more beautiful than this moment of the evening in Paris." "Or Parisian women." The eyes of the rabbit man glittered. "Excuse me, sir," he went on. "I must try and sell some rabbits." "Au revoir," said Andrews, holding out his hand. The rabbit man shook it with sudden vigor and went off, making a rabbit hop before him along the curbstone. He was hidden by the swiftly moving crowds. In the square, flaring violet arc lights were flickering on, lighting up their net-covered globes that hung like harsh moons above the pavement. Henslowe sat down on a chair beside Andrews. "How's Sinbad?" "Sinbad, old boy, is functioning. Aren't you frozen?" How do you mean, Henslow? Overheated, you chump, sitting out here in polar weather. No, but I mean, how are you functioning?" said Andrews, laughing. "I'm going to Poland tomorrow." "How?" "As a guard on a Red Cross supply train. I think you might make it if you want to come, if we beat it right over to the Red Cross before Major Smithers goes. Or we might take him out to dinner. But Henny, I'm staying." "Why the hell stay in this hole?" "I like it. I'm getting a better course in orchestration than I imagined existed, and I met a girl the other day, and I'm crazy over Paris." "If you go and get entangled, I swear I'll beat your head into the Polish shillelagh." "Of course you've met a girl. So have I. Lots. We can meet some more in Poland and dance polonaise with them." "No, but this girl's charming. You've seen her. She was the girl who was with the poilu at the Rat qui Danse the first night I was in Paris. We went to Louise together. Must have been a grand sentimental party. I swear, I may run after a Jane now and again, but I never let them interfere with the business of existence," muttered Henslowe crossly. They were both silent. "You'll be as bad as Heinz with his Moki and the lion cub named Bubu. By the way, it's dead." "Well, where shall we have dinner?" "I'm dining with Jeanne. I'm going to meet her in half an hour. I'm awfully sorry, Henny. We might all dine together." "A fat chance. No, I'll have to go and find that ass Aubrey and hear all about the peace conference. Heinz can't leave Moki because she's having hysterics on account of Bubu. I'll probably be driven to going to see Barrett in the end. You're a nice one. We'll have a grand seeing off party for you tomorrow, Henny. Look, I forgot. You're to meet Aubrey at the Crillon at 5 tomorrow, and he's going to take you to see Genevieve Rod." "Who the hell's Genevieve Rod?" "Darned if I know. But Aubrey said you'd got to come. She is an intellectual, so Aubrey says." "That's the last thing I want to meet." "Well, you can't help yourself. So long." Andrews sat a while more at the table outside the cafe. A cold wind was blowing. The sky was blue black, and the ashen white arc lamps cast a mortuary light over everything. In the colonnade of the Palais Royal the shadows were harsh and inky. In the square the people were gradually thinning. The lights in the Magasin du Louvre had gone out. From the cafe behind him a faint smell of fresh cooked food began to saturate the cold air of the street. Then he saw Jeanne advancing across the ash grey pavement of the square, slim and black under the arc lights. He ran to meet her. The cylindrical stove in the middle of the floor roared softly. In front of it the white cat was rolled into a fluffy ball, in which ears and nose made tiny splashes of pink, like those at the tips of the petals of certain white roses. One side of the stove, at the table against the window, sat an old brown man with a bright red stain on each cheekbone, who wore formless corduroy clothes, the color of his skin. Holding the small spoon in a knotted hand, he was stirring slowly and continuously a liquid that was yellow and steamed in a glass. Behind him was the window with sleet beating against it in the leaden light of a wintry afternoon. The other side of the stove was a zinc bar, with yellow bottles and green bottles and a water spigot with a neck like a giraffe's, that rose out of the bar beside a varnished wood pillar that made the decoration of the corner, with a terracotta pot of ferns on top of it. From where Andrews sat on the padded bench at the back of the room, the fern fronds made a black lacework against the left-hand side of the window, while against the other was the brown silhouette of the old man's head and the slant of his cap. The stove hid the door, and the white cat, round and symmetrical, formed the center of the visible universe. On the marble table beside Andrews were some pieces of crisp bread with butter on them, a saucer of damson jam, and a bowl with coffee and hot milk from which the steam rose in a faint spiral. His tunic was unbuttoned, and he rested his head on his two hands, staring through his fingers at a thick pile of ruled paper full of hastily drawn signs, some in ink and some in pencil, where now and then he made a mark with a pencil. At the other edge of the pile of papers were two books, one yellow and one white with coffee stains on it. The fire roared and the cat slept, and the old brown man stirred and stirred, rarely stopping for a moment to lift the glass to his lips. Occasionally the scratching of sleet upon the windows became audible, or there was a distant sound of dishpans through the door in the back. The sallow-faced clock that hung above the mirror that backed the bar jerked out one jingly strike, a half hour. Andrews did not look up. The cat still slept in front of the stove, which roared with a gentle sing-song. The old man still stirred the yellow liquid in his glass. The clock was ticking uphill against the hour. Andrews's hands were cold. There was a nervous flutter in his wrists and in his chest. Inside of him was a great rift of light, infinitely vast and infinitely distant. Through it sounds poured from somewhere, so that he trembled with them to his fingertips, sounds modulated into rhythms that washed back and forth and crossed each other like sea waves in a cove, sounds clotted into harmonies. Behind everything, the Queen of Sheba, out of Flaubert, held her fantastic hand with its long, gilded fingernails on his shoulder, and he was leaning forward over the brink of life. But the image was vague, like a shadow cast on the brilliance of his mind. The clock struck 4. The white, fluffy ball of the cat unrolled very slowly. Its eyes were very round and yellow. It put first one leg and then the other out before it on the tiled floor, spreading wide the pinky grey claws. Its tail rose up behind it, straight as the mast of a ship. With slow, processional steps, the cat walked towards the door. The old man drank down the yellow liquid and smacked his lips twice, loudly, meditatively. Andrews raised his head, his blue eyes looking straight before him without seeing anything. Dropping the pencil, he leaned back against the wall and stretched his arms out. Taking the coffee bowl between his two hands, he drank a little. It was cold. He piled some jam on a piece of bread and ate it, licking a little off his fingers afterwards. Then he looked towards the old brown man and said: "On est bien ici, n'est-ce pas, Monsieur Morue?" "Oui, on est bien ici," said the old man in a voice so gruff it seemed to rattle. Very slowly he got to his feet. "Good, I am going to the barge," he said. Then he called: "Chipette?" "Oui, monsieur." A little girl in a black apron with her hair in two tight pigtails that stood out behind her tiny bullet head as she ran, came through the door from the back part of the house. "There, give that to your mother," said the old brown man, putting some coppers in her hand. "Oui, monsieur." "You'd better stay where it's warm," said Andrews, yawning. "I have to work. It's only soldiers don't have to work," rattled the old brown man. When the door opened, a gust of raw air circled about the wine shop, and a roar of wind and hiss of sleet came from the slush-covered quai outside. The cat took refuge beside the stove, with its back up and its tail waving. The door closed and the old brown man's silhouette, slanted against the wind, crossed the grey oblong of the window. Andrews settled down to work again. "But you work a lot, don't you, Monsieur Jean?" said Chipette, putting her chin on the table beside the books and looking up into his eyes with little eyes like black beads. "I wonder if I do." "When I'm grown up, I shan't work a bit. I'll drive round in a carriage." Andrews laughed. Chipette looked at him for a minute and then went into the other room carrying away the empty coffee bowl. In front of the stove the cat sat on its haunches, licking a paw rhythmically with a pink curling tongue like a rose petal. Andrews whistled a few bars, staring at the cat. "What do you think of that, Minet? That's La Reine de Saba, La Reine de Saba." the cat curled into a ball again with great deliberation and went to sleep. Andrews began thinking of Jeanne, and the thought gave him a sense of quiet well-being. Strolling with her in the evening, through the streets full of men and women walking significantly together, sent a languid calm through his jangling nerves which he had never known in his life before. It excited him to be with her, but very suavely, so that he forgot that his limbs were swathed stiffly in an uncomfortable uniform, so that his feverish desire seemed to fly out of him until, with her body beside him, he seemed to drift effortlessly in the stream of the lives of all the people he passed, so languid, from the quiet loves that streamed up about him, that the hard walls of his personality seemed to have melted entirely into a mistiness of twilight streets. And for a moment, as he thought of it, a scent of flowers, heavy with pollen, and sprouting grass and damp moss and swelling sap seemed to tingle in his nostrils. Sometimes, swimming in the ocean on a rough day, he had felt the same reckless exhilaration when, towards the shore, a huge seething wave had caught him up and sped him forward on its crest. Sitting quietly in the empty wine shop that grey afternoon, he felt his blood grumble and swell in his veins as the new life was grumbling and swelling in the sticky buds of the trees, in the tender green quick under their rough bark, in the little furry animals of the woods, and in the sweet-smelling cattle that tramped into mud the lush meadows. In the premonition of spring was a restless wave of force that carried him and all of them with it tumultuously. The clock struck 5. Andrews jumped to his feet and, still struggling into his overcoat, darted out of the door. A raw wind blew on the square. The river was a muddy grey-green, swollen and rapid. A hoarse, triumphant roaring came from it. The sleet had stopped, but the pavements were covered with slush, and in the gutters were large puddles which the wind ruffled. Everything, houses, bridges, river and sky, was in shades of cold grey-green, broken by one jagged ochre-colored rift across the sky, against which the bulk of Notre Dame and the slender spire of the crossing rose dark and purplish. Andrews walked with long strides, splashing through the puddles, until, opposite the low building of the morgue, he caught a crowded green bus. Outside the Hotel Crillon were many limousines, painted olive drab, with numbers in white letters on the doors. The drivers, men with their olive drab coat collars turned up round their red faces, stood in groups under the portico. Andrews passed the sentry and went through the revolving doors into the lobby, which was vividly familiar. It had the smell he remembered having smelt in the lobbies of New York hotels, a smell of cigar smoke and furniture polish. On one side a door led to a big dining room where many men and women were having tea, from which came the smell of pastry and rich food. On the expanse of red carpet in front of him, officers and civilians stood in groups talking in low voices. There was a sound of jingling spurs and jangling dishes from the restaurant, and near where Andrews stood shifting his weight from one foot to the other, sprawled in a leather chair, a fat man with a black felt hat over his eyes and a large watch chain dangling limply over his bulbous paunch. He cleared his throat occasionally with a rasping noise and spat loudly into the spittoon beside him. At last Andrews caught sight of Aubrey, who was dapper with white cheeks and tortoise-shell glasses. "Come along," he said, seizing Andrews by the arm. "You're late." Then he went on whispering in Andrews's ear as they went out through the revolving doors. "Great things happened in the conference today, I can tell you that, old man." They crossed the bridge towards the portico of the Chamber of Deputies with its high pediment and its grey columns. Down the river they could see faintly the Eiffel Tower, with a drift of mist athwart it, like a section of spider web spun between the city and the clouds. "Do we have to go see these people, Aubrey?" "Yes, you can't back out now. Genevieve Rod wants to talk about American music." "But what on earth can I tell her about American music?" Wasn't there a man named McDowell who went mad or something?" Andrews laughed. "But you know I haven't any social graces. I suppose I'll have to say I think Foch is a little tin god." "You needn't say anything if you don't want to. They're very advanced anyway." "Oh, rats." They were going up a brown carpeted stair that had engravings on the landings, where there was a faint smell of stale food and dustpans. At the top landing Aubrey rang the bell at a varnished door. In a moment a girl opened it. She had a cigarette in her hand, her face was pale under a mass of reddish chestnut hair, her eyes very large, a pale brown, as large as the eyes of women in those paintings of Artemisias and Berenikes found in tombs in the Fayum. She wore a plain black dress. "Enfin," she said, and held out her hand to Aubrey. "There's my friend Andrews." She held out her hand to him absently, still looking at Aubrey. "Does he speak French?" "Good. This way." They went into a large room with a piano, where an elderly woman, with grey hair and yellow teeth and the same large eyes as her daughter, stood before the fireplace. "Maman, enfin ils arrivent, ces messieurs. Genevieve was afraid you weren't coming," Madame Rod said to Andrews, smiling. "Monsieur Aubrey gave us such a picture of your playing that we have been excited all day. We adore music." "I wish I could do something more to the point with it than adore it," said Genevieve Rod hastily, then she went on with a laugh. "But I forget. Monsieur Andreffs? Monsieur Ronsard." She made a gesture with her hand from Andrews to a young Frenchman in a cutaway coat, with small mustaches and a very tight vest, who bowed towards Andrews. "Now we'll have tea," said Genevieve Rod. "Everybody talks sense until they've had tea. It's only after tea that anyone is ever amusing." She pulled open some curtains that covered the door into the adjoining room. "I understand why Sarah Bernhardt is so fond of curtains," she said. "They give an air of drama to existence. There is nothing more heroic than curtains." She sat at the head of an oak table where were china platters with vari-colored pastries, an old pewter kettle under which an alcohol lamp burned, a Dresden china teapot in pale yellows and greens, and cups and saucers and plates with a double-headed eagle design in dull vermilion. "Tout ça," said Genevieve, waving her hand across the table, "c'est boche, but we haven't any others, so they'll have to do." The older woman, who sat beside her, whispered something in her ear and laughed. Genevieve put on a pair of tortoise-shell spectacles and started pouring out tea. "Debussy once drank out of that cup. It's cracked," she said, handing a cup to John Andrews. "Do you know anything of Mussorgsky's you can play to us after tea?" "I can't play anything any more. Ask me 3 months from now." "Oh, yes, but nobody expects you to do any tricks with it. You can certainly make it intelligible. That's all I want." "I have my doubts." Andrews sipped his tea slowly, looking now and then at Genevieve Rod, who had suddenly begun talking very fast to Ronsard. She held a cigarette between the fingers of a long thin hand. Her large pale brown eyes kept their startled look of having just opened on the world. A little smile appeared and disappeared maliciously in the curve of her cheek away from her small firm lips. The older woman beside her kept looking round the table with a jolly air of hospitality and showing her yellow teeth in a smile. Afterwards they went back to the sitting room, and Andrews sat down at the piano. The girl sat very straight on a little chair beside the piano. Andrews ran his fingers up and down the keys. "Did you say you knew Debussy?" he said. "I? No, but he used to come to see my father when I was a little girl. I have been brought up in the middle of music. That shows how silly it is to be a woman. There's no music in my head. Of course I am sensitive to it, but so are the tables and chairs in this apartment after all they've heard." Andrews started playing Schumann. He stopped suddenly. "Can you sing?" he said. "No." "I'd like to do the prose lyrique. I've never heard them." "I once tried to sing Le Soir," she said. "Wonderful. Do bring it out. But, good Lord, it's too difficult." "What is the use of being fond of music if you aren't willing to mangle it for the sake of producing it? I swear I'd rather hear a man picking out Auprès de ma blonde on a trombone than Chrysler playing Paganini impeccably enough to make you ill. But there is a middle ground." He interrupted her by starting to play again. As he played, without looking at her, he felt that her eyes were fixed on him, that she was standing tensely behind him. Her hand touched his shoulder. He stopped playing. "Oh, I am dreadfully sorry," she said. "Nothing. I am finished." "You were playing something of your own?" "Have you ever read Les Tentations de Saint Antoine?" he asked in a low voice. "Flaubert's?" "Yes. It's not his best work. A very interesting failure, though," she said. Andrews got up from the piano with difficulty, controlling a sudden growing irritation. "They seem to teach everybody to say that," he muttered. Suddenly he realized that other people were in the room. He went up to Madame Rod. "You must excuse me," he said. "I have an engagement. Aubrey, don't let me drag you away. I am late. I've got to run. You must come see us again." "Thank you," mumbled Andrews. Genevieve Rod went with him to the door. "We must know each other better," she said. "I like you for going off in a huff." Andrews flushed. "I was badly brought up," he said, pressing her thin cold hand. "And you French must always remember that we are barbarians. Some are repentant barbarians. I am not." She laughed, and John Andrews ran down the stairs and out into the grey blue streets, where the lamps were blooming into primrose color. He had a confused feeling that he had made a fool of himself, which made him writhe with helpless anger. He walked with long strides through the streets of the Rive Gauche, full of people going home from work, towards the little wine shop on the Quai de la Tournelle. It was a Paris Sunday morning. Old women in black shawls were going into the church of Saint Etienne du Mont. Each time the leather doors opened, it let a little whiff of incense out into the smoky morning air. 3 pigeons walked about the cobblestones, putting their coral feet one before the other with an air of importance. The pointed facade of the church and its slender tower and cupola cast a bluish shadow on the square in front of it, into which the shadows the old women trailed behind them vanished, as they hobbled towards the church. The opposite side of the square and the railing of the Pantheon and its tall brownish grey flank were flooded with dull orange colored sunlight. Andrews walked back and forth in front of the church, looking at the sky and the pigeons and the facade of the library of Sainte Genevieve, and at the rare people who passed across the end of the square, noting forms and colors and small comical aspects of things with calm delight, savoring everything almost with complacency. His music, he felt, was progressing now that, undisturbed, he lived all day long in the rhythm of it. His mind and his fingers were growing supple. The hard molds that had grown up about his spirit were softening. As he walked back and forth in front of the church waiting for Jeanne, he took an inventory of his state of mind. He was very happy. "Eh bien?" Jeanne had come up behind him. They ran like children hand in hand across the sunny square. "I have not had any coffee yet," said Andrews. "How late you must get up. But you can't have any till we get to the Porte Maillot, Jean." "Why not?" "Because I say you can't." "But that's cruelty." "It won't be long." "But I'm dying with hunger. I will die in your hands." "Can't you understand? Once we get to the Porte Maillot, we'll be far from your life and my life. The day will be ours. One must not tempt fate." "You funny girl." The metro was not crowded. Andrews and Jeanne sat opposite each other without talking. Andrews was looking at the girl's hands, limp on her lap, small overworked hands with places at the tips of the fingers where the skin was broken and scarred, with chipped uneven nails. Suddenly she caught his glance. He flushed and she said jauntily: "Well, we'll all be rich some day, like princes and princesses in fairy tales." They both laughed. As they were leaving the train at the terminus, He put his arm timidly round her waist. She wore no corsets. His fingers trembled at the litheness of the flesh under her clothes. Feeling a sort of terror go through him, he took away his arm. "Now," she said quietly as they emerged into the sunlight and the bare trees of the broad avenue, "you can have all the cafe au lait you want." "You'll have some too." "Why be extravagant? I've had my petit déjeuner. But I'm going to be extravagant all day. We might as well start now. I don't know exactly why, but I am very happy. We'll eat brioche." "But my dear, it's only profiteers who can eat brioche nowadays." "You just watch us." They went into a patisserie. An elderly woman with a lean yellow face and thin hair waited on them, casting envious glances up through her eyelashes as she piled the rich brown brioche on a piece of tissue paper. "You'll pass the day in the country?" she asked in a little wistful voice as she handed Andrews the change. "Yes," he said. "How well you guessed." As they went out of the door they heard her muttering, "Oh, la jeunesse, la jeunesse." They found a table in the sun at a cafe opposite the gate from which they could watch people and automobiles and carriages coming in and out. Beyond, a grass-grown bit of the fortifications gave an 1870 look to things. "How jolly it is at the Porte Maillot," cried Andrews. She looked at him and laughed. "But how gay he is today." "No, I always like it here. It's the spot in Paris where you always feel well. When you go out you have all the fun of leaving town, when you go in you have all the fun of coming back to town. But aren't you eating any brioche?" "I've eaten one. You eat them. You are hungry." "Jeanne, I don't think I've ever been so happy in my life. It is almost worth having been in the army for the joy your freedom gives you. That frightful life. How is Etienne?" "He is in Mayence. He's bored." "Jeanne, we must live very much, we who are free to make up for all the people who are still... bored." "A lot of good it'll do them," she cried, laughing. "It's funny, Jeanne, I threw myself into the army. I was so sick of being free and not getting anywhere. Now I've learnt that life is to be used, not just held in the hand like a box of bonbons that nobody eats." She looked at him blankly. "I mean, I don't get enough out of life," he said. "Let's go." They got to their feet. "What do you mean?" she said slowly. "One takes what one gives, that is all. There's no choice." "But look, there's the Malmaison train. We must run." Giggling and breathless they climbed on the trailer, squeezing themselves on the back platform where everyone was pushing and exclaiming. The car began to joggle its way through Neuilly. Their bodies were pressed together by the men and women about them. Andrews put his arm firmly around Jeanne's waist and looked down at her pale cheek that was pressed against his chest. Her little round black straw hat with a bit of a red flower on it was just under his chin. "I can't see a thing," she gasped, still giggling. "I'll describe the landscape," said Andrews. "Why, we are crossing the Seine already." "Oh, how pretty it must be." An old gentleman with a pointed white beard who stood beside them laughed benevolently. "But don't you think the Seine's pretty?" Jeanne looked up at him impudently. Without a doubt, it was the way you said it," said the old gentleman. "You are going to Saint Germain?" he asked Andrews. "No, to Malmaison." "Oh, you should go to Saint Germain. Monsieur Reinach's prehistoric museum is there. It's very beautiful. You should not go home to your country without seeing it." "Are there monkeys in it?" asked Jeanne. "No," said the old gentleman, turning away. "I adore monkeys," said Jeanne. The car was going along a broad empty boulevard, with trees and grass plots and rows of low storehouses and little dilapidated rooming houses along either side. Many people had got out and there was plenty of room, but Andrews kept his arm round the girl's waist. The constant contact with her body made him feel very languid. "How good it smells," said Jeanne. It's the spring. I want to lie on the grass and eat violets. Oh, how good you were to bring me out like this, Jean. You must know lots of fine ladies you could have brought out, because you are so well educated. How is it you are only an ordinary soldier? Good God! I wouldn't be an officer. Why? It must be rather nice to be an officer. Does Etienne want to be an officer? But he's socialist, that's different. Well, I suppose I must be a socialist too. But let's talk of something else. Andrews moved over to the other side of the platform. They were passing little villas with gardens on the road where yellow and pale purple crocuses bloomed. Now and then there was a scent of violets in the moist air. The sun had disappeared under soft, purplish grey clouds. There was occasionally a rainy chill in the wind. Andrews suddenly thought of Geneviève Rod. Curious how vividly he remembered her face, her wide open eyes, and her way of smiling without moving her firm lips. A feeling of annoyance went through him. How silly of him to go off rudely like that. And he became very anxious to talk to her again. Things he wanted to say to her came to his mind. "Well, are you asleep?" said Jeanne, tugging at his arm. "Here we are." Andrews flushed furiously. "Oh, how nice it is here, how nice it is here," Jeanne was saying. "Why, it is 11 o'clock," said Andrews. "We must see the palace before lunch," cried Jeanne, and she started running up a lane of linden trees, where the fat buds were just bursting into little crinkling fans of green. New grass was sprouting in the wet ditches on either side. Andrews ran after her, his feet pounding hard in the moist gravel road. When he caught up to her, he threw his arms around her recklessly and kissed her panting mouth. She broke away from him and strode demurely arranging her hat. "Monster," she said. "I trimmed this hat especially to come out with you, and you do your best to wreck it." "Poor little hat," said Andrews. "But it is so beautiful today, and you are very lovely, Jeanne." "The great Napoleon must have said that to the Empress Josephine, and you know what he did to her," said Jeanne, almost solemnly. "But she must have been awfully bored with him long before." "No," said Jeanne, "that's how women are." They went through big iron gates into the palace grounds. Later they sat at a table in the garden of a little restaurant. The sun, very pale, had just showed itself, making the knives and forks and the white wine in their glasses gleam faintly. Lunch had not come yet. They sat looking at each other silently. Andrews felt weary and melancholy. He could think of nothing to say. Jeanne was playing with some tiny white daisies with pink tips to their petals, arranging them in circles and crosses on the tablecloth. "Aren't they slow?" said Andrews. "But it's nice here, isn't it?" Jeanne smiled brilliantly. "But how glum he looks now." She threw some daisies at him. Then, after a pause, she added mockingly: "It's hunger, my dear. Good Lord, how dependent men are on food." Andrews drank down his wine at a gulp. He felt that if he could only make an effort, he could lift off the stifling melancholy that was settling down on him like a weight that kept growing heavier. A man in khaki with his face and neck scarlet staggered into the garden dragging beside him a mud-encrusted bicycle. He sank into an iron chair, letting the bicycle fall with a clatter at his feet. "Hi, hi," he called in a hoarse voice. A waiter appeared and contemplated him suspiciously. The man in khaki had hair as red as his face, which was glistening with sweat. His shirt was torn and he had no coat. His breeches and puttees were invisible for mud. "Gimme a beer," croaked the man in khaki. The waiter shrugged his shoulders and walked away. "Il demande une bière," said Andrews. "Mais monsieur, I'll pay. Get it for him." The waiter disappeared. "Thankee, Yank," roared the man in khaki. The waiter brought a tall narrow yellow glass. The man in khaki took it from his hand, drank it down at a draught, and handed back the empty glass. Then he spat, wiped his mouth on the back of his hand, got with difficulty to his feet, and shambled towards Andrews's table. "I presume, the lady and you don't mind, Yank, if I parleys with ye a bit, do yez?" "No, come along. Where did you come from?" The man in khaki dragged an iron chair behind him to a spot near the table. Before sitting down, he bobbed his head in the direction of Jeanne, with an air of solemnity, tugging at the same time at a lock of his red hair. After some fumbling, he got a red-bordered handkerchief out of his pocket and wiped his face with it, leaving a long black smudge of machine oil on his forehead. "I'm a bearer of important secret messages, Yank," he said, leaning back in the little iron chair. "I'm a dispatch rider." "You look all in." "Not a bit of it. I just had a little hold up, that's all, in a little lane. Some buggers tried to do me in." "What do you mean?" "I guess they had a little information, that's all. I'm carrying important messages from our headquarters in Rouen to your president. I was going through a bloody ticket pass this side. I don't know how you pronounce the bloody town. I was on my bike making about 30 for the road, and was all a murk when I saw 4 buggers standing across the road. Looked to me suspicious like, so I just jammed the juice into the bike and made for the middle un. He dodged all right. Then they started shooting and a bloody bullet buggered the bike. It was being born with a call that saved me. I picked myself up out of the ditch and lost him in the woods. Then I got to another bloody town and commandeered this old sweating machine. How many kills is there to Paris, Yank?" 15 or 16, I think." "What's he saying, Jean?" "Some men tried to stop him on the road. He's a dispatch rider." "Isn't he ugly? Is he English?" "Irish." "You betcher, miss. Here Landais, that's me." "You picked a good looker this time, Yank. But wait till I get to Paris. I clean up a good £100 on this job in bonuses. What part you come from, Yank?" "Virginia. I live in New York." "I been in Detroit. Going back there to get in the automobile business soon as I clean up a few more bonuses. Europe's dead and stinking, Yank. Ain't no place for a young fella. It's dead and stinking, that's what it is." "Oh, it's pleasanter to live here than in America. Say, do you often get held up that way?" "Ain't happened to me before, but it has to pals of mine." "Who do you think it was?" "I don't know. Uns or some of these bloody secret agents round the peace conference. But I got to go. That despatch won't keep." "All right, the beer's on me." "Thank ye, Yank." The man got to his feet, shook hands with Andrews and Jeanne, jumped on the bicycle, and rode out of the garden to the road, threading his way through the iron chairs and tables. "Wasn't he a funny customer?" cried Andrews, laughing. "What a wonderful joke things are." The waiter arrived with the omelette that began their lunch. "Gives you an idea of how the old lava's bubbling in the volcano. There's nowhere on earth a man can dance so well as on a volcano." "But don't talk that way," said Jeanne, laying down her knife and fork. "It's terrible. We will waste our youth to no purpose. Our fathers enjoyed themselves when they were young. And if there had been no war we should have been so happy, Etienne and I. My father was a small manufacturer of soap and perfumery. Etienne would have had a splendid situation. I should never have had to work. We had a nice house. I should have been married." "But this way, Jeanne, don't you have more freedom?" She shrugged her shoulders. Later she burst out: "But what's the good of freedom? What can you do with it? What one wants is to live well and have a beautiful house and be respected by people. Oh, life was so sweet in France before the war." "In that case it's not worth living," said Andrews in a savage voice, holding himself in. They went on eating silently. The sky became overcast. A few drops splashed on the tablecloth. "We'll have to take coffee inside," said Andrews. "And you think it is funny that people should shoot at a man on a motorcycle going through a wood?" "All that seems to me terrible, terrible," said Jeanne. "Look out, here comes the rain." They ran into the restaurant through the first hissing sheet of the shower, and sat at a table near a window watching the raindrops dance and flicker on the green iron tables. A scent of wet earth and the mushroom-like odor of sodden leaves came in borne on damp gusts through the open door. A waiter closed the glass doors and bolted them. "He wants to keep out the spring. He can't," said Andrews. They smiled at each other over their coffee cups. They were in sympathy again. When the rain stopped, they walked across wet fields by a footpath full of little clear puddles that reflected the blue sky and the white and amber tinged clouds where the shadows were light purplish grey. They walked slowly, arm in arm, pressing their bodies together. They were very tired, they did not know why, and stopped often to rest leaning against the damp boles of trees. Beside a pond, pale blue and amber and silver from the reflected sky, they found under a big beech tree a patch of wild violets, which Jeanne picked greedily, mixing them with the little crimson-tipped daisies in the tight bouquet. At the suburban railway station they sat silent, side by side on a bench, sniffing the flowers now and then, so sunk in languid weariness that they could hardly summon strength to climb into a seat on top of a third-class coach, which was crowded with people coming home from a day in the country. Everybody had violets and crocuses and twigs with buds on them. In people's stiff, citified clothes lingered a smell of wet fields and sprouting woods. All the girls shrieked and threw their arms round the men when the train went through a tunnel or under a bridge. Whatever happened, everybody laughed. When the train arrived in the station, it was almost with reluctance that they left it, as if they felt from that moment their workaday lives began again. Andrews and Jeanne walked down the platform without touching each other. Their fingers were stained and sticky from touching buds and crushing young sappy leaves and grass stalks. The air of the city seemed dense and unbreathable after the scented moisture of the fields. They dined at a little restaurant on the Quai Voltaire, and afterwards walked slowly towards the Place Saint-Michel, feeling the wine and the warmth of the food sending new vigor into their tired bodies. Andrews had his arm round her, and they talked in low, intimate voices, hardly moving their lips, looking long at the men and women they saw sitting twined in each other's arms on benches, at the couples of boys and girls that kept passing them, talking slowly and quietly, as they were, bodies pressed together as theirs were. "How many lovers there are," said Andrews. "Are we lovers?" asked Jeanne with a crazy little laugh. "I wonder. Have you ever been crazily in love, Jeanne?" "I don't know. There was a boy in Laon named Marcelin. But I was a little fool then. The last news of him was from Verdun." "Have you had many? Like I am?" "How sentimental we are," she cried, laughing. "No, I wanted to know. I know so little of life," said Andrews. "I have amused myself, as best I could," said Jeanne in a serious tone. "But I am not frivolous. There have been very few men I have liked, so I have had few friends. Do you want to call them lovers? But lovers are what married women have on the stage. All that sort of thing is very silly." "Not so very long ago," said Andrews, "I used to dream of being romantically in love, with people climbing up the ivy on castle walls and fiery kisses on balconies in the moonlight." "Like at the Opera Comique," cried Jeanne, laughing. "That was all very silly. But even now I want so much more of life than life can give." They leaned over the parapet and listened to the hurrying swish of the river, now soft and now loud, where the reflections of the lights on the opposite bank writhed like golden snakes. Andrews noticed that there was someone beside them. The faint greenish glow from the lamp on the quai enabled him to recognize the lame boy he had talked to months ago on the butte. "I wonder if you'll remember me," he said. "You are the American who was in the restaurant, Place du Tertre. I don't remember when, but it was long ago." They shook hands. "But you are alone," said Andrews. "Yes, I am always alone," said the lame boy firmly. "Au revoir," said Andrews. "Good luck," said the lame boy. Andrews heard his crutch tapping on the pavement as he went away along the quai. "Jeanne," said Andrews suddenly, "you'll come home with me, won't you?" "But you have a friend living with you." "He's gone to Brussels. He won't be back till tomorrow." "I suppose one must pay for one's dinner," said Jeanne maliciously. "Good God, no!" Andrews buried his face in his hands. The sing-song of the river pouring through the bridges filled his ears. He wanted desperately to cry. Bitter desire that was like hatred made his flesh tingle, made his hands ache to crush her hands in them. "Come along," he said gruffly. "I didn't mean to say that," she said in a gentle tired voice. "You know I'm not a very nice person." The greenish glow of the lamp lit up the contour of one of her cheeks as she tilted her head up, and glimmered in her eyes. A soft sentimental sadness suddenly took hold of Andrews. He felt as he used to feel when, as a very small child, his mother used to tell him Brer Rabbit stories, and he would feel himself drifting helplessly on the stream of her soft voice, narrating, drifting towards something unknown and very sad, which he could not help. They started walking again, past the Pont Neuf, towards the glare of the Place Saint Michel. Three names had come into Andrews's head: Arsinoe, Berenike, Artemisia. For a little while he puzzled over them, and then he remembered that Genevieve Rod had the large eyes and the wide smooth forehead and the firm little lips the women had in the portraits that were sewn on the mummy cases in the Fayum. But those patrician women of Alexandria had not had chestnut hair with a glimpse of burnished copper in it. They might have dyed it, though. "Why are you laughing?" asked Jeanne. "Because things are so silly." "Perhaps you mean people are silly," she said, looking up at him out of the corners of her eyes. "You're right." They walked in silence till they reached Andrews's door. "You go up first and see that there's no one there," said Jeanne in a businesslike tone. Andrews's hands were cold. He felt his heart thumping while he climbed the stairs. The room was empty. A fire was ready to light in the small fireplace. Andrews hastily tidied up the table and kicked under the bed some soiled clothes that lay in a heap in a corner. A thought came to him. How like his performances in his room at college when he had heard that a relative was coming to see him. He tiptoed downstairs. "Bien, tu peux venir, Jeanne," he said. She sat down rather stiffly in the straight-backed armchair beside the fire. "How pretty the fire is," she said. "Jeanne, I think I'm crazily in love with you," said Andrews in an excited voice. "Like at the Opera Comique." She shrugged her shoulders. "The room's nice," she said. "Oh, but what a big bed." "You're the first woman who's been up here in my time, Jeanne." "Oh, but this uniform is frightful." Andrews thought suddenly of all the tingling bodies restrained into the rigid attitudes of automatons in uniforms like this one, of all the hideous farce of making men into machines. Oh, if some gesture of his could only free them all for life and freedom and joy. The thought drowned everything else for the moment. "But you pull the button off," cried Jeanne, laughing hysterically. "I'll just have to sew it on again." "Never mind. If you knew how I hated them." "What white skin you have, like a woman's. I suppose that's because you are blonde," said Jeanne. The sound of the door being shaken vigorously woke Andrews. He got up and stood in the middle of the floor for a moment without being able to collect his wits. The shaking of the door continued, and he heard Walters's voice crying, "Andy! Andy!" Andrews felt shame creeping up through him like nausea. He felt a passionate disgust towards himself and Jeanne and Walters. He had an impulse to move furtively as if he had stolen something. He went to the door and opened it a little. "Say, Walters, old man," he said, "I can't let you in. I've got a girl with me." I'm sorry. I thought you wouldn't get back till tomorrow." "You're kidding, aren't you?" came Walters's voice out of the dark hall. "No." Andrews shut the door decisively and bolted it again. Jeanne was still asleep. Her black hair had come undone and spread over the pillow. Andrews pulled the covers up about her carefully. Then he got into the other bed, where he lay awake a long time, staring at the ceiling. End of section 13. Of Three Soldiers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by M.B. Three Soldiers by John Dos Passos. Section 14. 4. People walked along the boulevard looking curiously through the railing at the line of men in olive drab that straggled round the edge of the courtyard. The line moved slowly past a table where an officer and two enlisted men were poring over big lists of names and piles of palely tinted banknotes and silver francs that glittered white. Above the men's heads a thin haze of cigarette smoke rose into the sunlight. There was a sound of voices and of feet shuffling on the gravel. The men who had been paid went off jauntily, the money jingling in their pockets. The men at the table had red faces and tense, serious expressions. They pushed the money into the soldiers' hands with a rough jerk and pronounced the names as if they were machines clicking. Andrews saw that one of the men at the table was Walters. He smiled and whispered hello as he came up to him. Walters kept his eyes fixed on the list. While Andrews was waiting for the man ahead of him to be paid, he heard two men in the line talking. "Wasn't that a hell of a place? Do you remember the lad that died in the barracks one day?" "Sure, I was in the medics there too. There was a hell of a sergeant in that company tried to make the kid get up, and the loot came and said he'd court-martial him, and then they found out that he'd cashed in his checks. What'd he die of?" "Heart failure, I guess. I don't know though, he never did take to the life." "No. That place caused was enough to make any guy cash in his checks." Andrews got his money. As he was walking away, he strolled up to the two men he had heard talking. "Were you fellows in Cosne?" "Sure." "Did you know a fellow named Fuselli?" "I don't know." "Sure you do," said the other man. "You remember Dan Fuselli. The little wop thought he was going to be corporal. He had another think comin'." They both laughed. Andrews walked off, vaguely angry. There were many soldiers on the Boulevard Montparnasse. He turned into a side street, feeling suddenly furtive and humble, as if he would hear any minute the harsh voice of a sergeant shouting orders at him. The silver in his breeches pocket jingled with every step. Andrews leaned on the balustrade of the balcony, looking down into the square in front of the Opéra Comique. He was dizzy with the beauty of the music he had been hearing. He had a sense somewhere in the distances of his mind of the great rhythm of the sea. People chattered all about him on the wide, crowded balcony, but he was only conscious of the blue-grey mistiness of the night where the lights made patterns in green gold and red gold. And compelling his attention from everything else, the rhythm swept through him like sea waves. "I thought you'd be here," said Genevieve Rod in a quiet voice beside him. Andrews felt strangely tongue-tied. "It's nice to see you," he blurted out, after looking at her silently for a moment. "Of course you love Pelléa?" "It is the first time I've heard it." "Why haven't you been to see us? It's 2 weeks. We've been expecting you." "I didn't know. Oh, I'll certainly come. I don't know anyone at present I can talk music to." "You know me." "Anyone else, I should have said." "Are you working?" "Yes. But this hinders frightfully." Andrews yanked at the front of his tunic. "Still, I expect to be free very soon. I'm putting in an application for discharge." "I suppose you will feel you can do so much better. You will be much stronger now that you have done your duty." "No, by no means." "Tell me, what was that you played at our house?" "The Three Green Riders on Wild Asses," said Andrews, smiling. "What do you mean?" "It's a prelude to the Queen of Sheba," said Andrews. "If you didn't think the same as Monsieur Emile Faguet and everyone else about Saint Antoine, I'd tell you what I mean." "Oh, that was very silly of me. But if you pick up all the silly things people say accidentally, well, you must be angry most of the time." In the dim light he could not see her eyes. There was a little glow on the curve of her cheek coming from under the dark of her hat to her rather pointed chin. Behind it he could see other faces of men and women crowded on the balcony talking, lit up crudely by the gold glare that came out through the French windows of the lobby. "I have always been tremendously fascinated by the place in La Tentation where the Queen of Sheba visited Antoine, that's all," said Andrews gruffly. "Is that the first thing you've done? It made me think a little of Borodine." "The first that's at all pretentious. It's probably just a steal from everything I've ever heard." "No, it's good. I suppose you had it in your head all through those dreadful and glorious days at the front. Is it for piano or orchestra?" "All that's finished is for piano. I hope to orchestrate it eventually. Oh, but it's really silly to talk this way. I don't know enough. I need years of hard work before I can do anything. And I have wasted so much time. That is the most frightful thing. One has so few years of youth." "That's the bell. We must scuttle back to our seats. Till the next intermission." She slipped through the glass doors and disappeared. Andrews went back to his seat, very excited, very full of unquiet exultation. The first strains of the orchestra were pain, he felt them so acutely. After the last act they walked in silence down a green street, hurrying to get away from the crowds of the boulevard. When they reached the Avenue de l'Opera, she said: "Did you say you were going to stay in France?" "Yes, indeed, if I can. I am going tomorrow to put in an application for discharge in France." "What will you do then?" "I shall have to find a job of some sort that will let me study at the Schola Cantorum, but I have enough money to last a little while." "You are courageous." "I forgot to ask if you would rather take the metro." "No, let's walk." They went under the arch of the Louvre. The air was full of a fine wet mist, so that every street lamp was surrounded by a blur of light. "My blood is full of the music of Debussy," said Genevieve Rod, spreading out her arms. "It's no use trying to say what one feels about it. Words aren't much good anyway, are they?" "That depends." They walked silently along the quai. The mist was so thick that they could not see the Seine, but whenever they came near a bridge they could hear the water rustling through the arches. "France is stifling," said Andrews all of a sudden. "It stifles you very slowly, with beautiful silk bands. America beats your brains out with a policeman's billy." "What do you mean?" she said, letting pique chill her voice. "You know so much in France. You have made the world so neat." "But you seem to want to stay here," she said with a laugh. "It's that there's nowhere else. There is nowhere except Paris where one can find out things about music, particularly. But I am one of those people who was not made to be contented." "Only sheep are contented." "I think I have been happier this month in Paris than ever before in my life. It seems 6, so much has happened in it. Poissac is where I am happiest." "Where is that?" "We have a country house there, very old and very tumble down. They say that Rabelais used to come to the village. But our house is from later, from the time of Henri IV. Poissac is not very far from Tours. An ugly name, isn't it? But to me it is very beautiful. The house has orchards all round it. and yellow roses with flushed centers poke themselves in my window, and there is a little tower like Montaigne's. When I get out of the army I shall go somewhere in the country and work and work." "Music should be made in the country, when the sap is rising in the trees. D'après nature, as the rabbit man said." "Who's the rabbit man?" "A very pleasant person," said Andrews, bubbling with laughter. "You shall meet him some day. He sells little stuffed rabbits that jump, outside the Cafe de Rohan. Here we are. Thank you for coming home with me." "But how soon? Are you sure it is the house? We can't have got there as soon as this." "Yes, it's my house," said Genevieve Rod, laughing. She held out her hand to him, and he shook it eagerly. The latchkey clicked in the door. "Why don't you have a cup of tea with us here tomorrow?" she said. "With pleasure." The big varnished door with its knocker in the shape of a ring closed behind her. Andrews walked away with a light step, feeling jolly and exhilarated. As he walked down the mist-filled quai towards the Place Saint-Michel, his ears were filled with the lisping gurgle of the river past the piers of the bridges. Walters was asleep. On the table in his room was a card from Jeanne. Andrews read the card, holding it close to the candle. "How long it is since I saw you," she said. "I shall pass the Cafe de Rohan Wednesday at 7, along the pavement opposite the Magasin du Louvre." It was a card of Malmaison. Andrews flushed. Bitter melancholy throbbed through him. He walked languidly to the window and looked out into the dark court. A window below his spilled a warm golden haze into the misty night, through which he could make out vaguely some pots of ferns standing on the wet flagstones. From somewhere came a dense smell of hyacinths. Fragments of thought slipped one after another through his mind. He thought of himself washing windows long ago at training camp, and remembered the way the gritty sponge scraped his hands. He could not help feeling shame when he thought of those days. Well, that's all over now, he told himself. He wondered, in a half irritated way, about Genevieve Rod. What sort of a person was she? Her face, with its wide eyes and pointed chin, and the reddish chestnut hair, unpretentiously coiled above the white forehead, was very vivid in his mind, though when he tried to remember what it was like in profile, he could not. She had thin hands, with long fingers that ought to play the piano well. When she grew old, would she be yellow-toothed and jolly, like her mother? He could not think of her old. She was too vigorous. There was too much malice in her passionately restrained gestures. The memory of her faded, and there came to his mind Jeanne's overworked little hands, with calloused places, and the tips of the fingers grimy and scarred from needlework. But the smell of hyacinths that came up from the mist-filled courtyard was like a sponge wiping all impressions from his brain. The dense, sweet smell in the damp air made him feel languid and melancholy. He took off his clothes slowly and got into bed. The smell of the hyacinths came to him very faintly, so that he did not know whether or not he was imagining it. The major's office was a large white painted room, with elaborate mouldings and mirrors on all four walls, so that while Andrews waited, cap in hand, to go up to the desk, he could see the small round major with his pink face and bald head repeated to infinity in two directions in the grey brilliance of the mirrors. "What do you want?" said the major, looking up from some papers he was signing. Andrews stepped up to the desk. On both sides of the room a skinny figure in olive drab, repeated endlessly, stepped up to endless mahogany desks, which faded into each other in an endless dusty perspective. "Would you mind okaying this application for discharge, Major?" "How many dependents?" muttered the major through his teeth, poring over the application. "None. It's for discharge in France to study music." "Won't do. You need an affidavit that you can support yourself. that you have enough money to continue your studies. You want to study music, eh? Do you think you've got talent? Needs a very great deal of talent to study music." "Yes, sir. But is there anything else I need except the affidavit?" "No. It'll go through in short order. We're glad to release men. We're glad to release any man with a good military record. Williams!" "Yes, sir." A sergeant came over from a small table by the door. "Show this man what he needs to get discharged in France." Andrews saluted. Out of the corner of his eye he saw the figures in the mirror, saluting down an endless corridor. When he got out on the street in front of the great white building where the major's office was, a morose feeling of helplessness came over him. There were many automobiles of different sizes and shapes, limousines, runabouts, touring cars, lined up all along the curb, all painted olive drab and neatly stenciled with numbers in white. Now and then a personage came out of the white marble building, puttees and Sam Browne belt gleaming, and darted into an automobile, or a noisy motorcycle stopped with a jerk in front of the wide door to let out an officer in goggles and mud-splattered trench coat, who disappeared immediately through revolving doors. Andrews could imagine him striding along halls, where from every door came an imperious clicking of typewriters, where papers were piled high on yellow, varnished desks, where sallow-faced clerks in uniform loafed in rooms, where the four walls were covered from floor to ceiling with card catalogues. And every day they were adding to the paper, piling up more little drawers with index cards. It seemed to Andrews that the shiny white marble building would have to burst with all the paper stored up within it, and would flood the broad avenue with avalanches of index cards. "Button your coat," snarled a voice in his ear. Andrews looked up suddenly. An MP with a raw-looking face in which was a long sharp nose had come up to him. Andrews buttoned up his overcoat and said nothing. "You can't hang around here this way," the MP called after him. Andrews flushed and walked away without turning his head. He was stinging with humiliation. An angry voice inside him kept telling him that he was a coward, that he should make some futile gesture of protest. Grotesque pictures of revolt flamed through his mind, until he remembered that when he was very small the same tumultuous pride had seethed and ached in him whenever he had been reproved by an older person. Helpless despair fluttered about within him like a bird beating against the wires of a cage. Was there no outlet, no gesture of expression? Would he have to go on this way day after day, swallowing the bitter gall of indignation that every new symbol of his slavery brought to his lips? He was walking in an agitated way across the Jardin des Tuileries, full of the little children and women with dogs on leashes and nursemaids with starched white caps, when he met Genevieve Rod and her mother. Genevieve was dressed in pearl grey, with an elegance a little too fashionable to please Andrews. Madame Rod wore black. In front of them a black and tan terrier ran from one side to the other, on little nervous legs that trembled like steel springs. "Isn't it lovely this morning?" cried Genevieve. "I didn't know you had a dog." "Oh, we never go out without Santo. A protection to two lone women, you know," said Madame Rod, laughing. "Viens, Santo, dis bonjour au monsieur." "He usually lives at Poissac," said Genevieve. The little dog barked furiously at Andrews, a shrill bark like a child squalling. "He knows he ought to be suspicious of soldiers. I imagine most soldiers would change with him if they had a chance. Viens, Santo, viens, Santo. Will you change lives with me, Santo?" "You look as if you'd been quarreling with somebody," said Genevieve Rod lightly. "I have. I'm going to write a book on slave psychology. It would be very amusing," said Andrews in a gruff, breathless voice. "But we must hurry, dear, or we'll be late to the tailor's," said Madame Rod. She held out her black gloved hands to Andrews. "We'll be in at tea time this afternoon. You might play me some more of the Queen of Sheba," said Genevieve. "I'm afraid I shan't be able to. But you never can tell." "Thank you." He was relieved to have left them. He had been afraid he would burst out into some childish tirade. What a shame old Henslowe hadn't come back yet. He could have poured out all his despair to him. He had often enough before. And Henslowe was out of the army now. Wearily Andrews decided that he would have to start scheming and intriguing again as he had schemed and intrigued to come to Paris in the first place. He thought of the white marble building, and the officers with shiny puttees going in and out, and the typewriters clicking in every room, and the understanding of his helplessness before all that complication made him shiver. An idea came to him. He ran down the steps of a metro station. Aubrey would know someone at the Crillon who could help him. But when the train reached the Concorde station, he could not summon the willpower to get out. He felt a harsh repugnance to any effort. What was the use of humiliating himself and begging favors of people? It was hopeless anyway. In a fierce burst of pride a voice inside of him was shouting that he, John Andrews, should have no shame, that he should force people to do things for him, that he, who lived more acutely than the rest, suffering more pain and more joy, who had the power to express his pain and his joy so that it would impose itself on others, should force his will on those around him. More of the psychology of slavery, said Andrews to himself, suddenly smashing the soap bubble of his egoism. The train had reached the Porte Maillot. Andrews stood in the sunny boulevard in front of the metro station, where the plane trees were showing tiny gold-brown leaves, sniffing the smell of a flower stall in front of which a woman stood, with a deft, abstracted gesture, tying up bunch after bunch of violets. He felt a desire to be out in the country, to be away from houses and people. There was a line of men and women buying tickets for Saint Germain. Still indecisive, he joined it, and at last, almost without intending it, found himself jolting through Neuilly in the green trailer of the electric car, that waggled like a duck's tail when the car went fast. He remembered his last trip on that same car with Jeanne, and wished mournfully that he might have fallen in love with her, that he might have forgotten himself and the army and everything in crazy romantic love. When he got off the car at Saint Germain, he had stopped formulating his thoughts. Soggy despair throbbed in him like an infected wound. He sat for a while at the cafe opposite the chateau, looking at the light red walls and the strong stone-bordered windows, and the jaunty turrets and chimneys that rose above the classic balustrade with its big urns on the edge of the roof. The park, through the tall iron railings, was full of russet and pale lines, all mist of new leaves. Had they really lived more vividly, the people of the Renaissance? Andrews could almost see men with plumed hats and short cloaks and elaborate brocaded tunics, swaggering with a hand at the sword hilt about the quiet square in front of the gate of the chateau. And he thought of the great sudden wind of freedom that had blown out of Italy, before which dogmas and slaveries had crumbled to dust. In contrast, the world today seemed pitifully arid. Men seemed to have shrunk in stature before the vastness of the mechanical contrivances they had invented. Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Aretino, Cellini, would the strong figures of men ever so dominate the world again? Today everything was congestion, the scurrying of crowds. Men had become ant-like. Perhaps it was inevitable that the crowds should sink deeper and deeper in slavery. Whichever one, tyranny from above or spontaneous organization from below, there could be no individuals. He went through the gates into the park, laid out with a few flower beds where pansies bloomed. Through the dark ranks of elm trunks was brilliant sky, with here and there a moss-green statue standing out against it. At the head of an alley he came out on a terrace. Beyond the strong curves of the pattern of the iron balustrade was an expanse of country, pale green, falling to blue towards the horizon, patched with pink and slate-colored houses and carved with railway tracks. At his feet the Seine shone like a curved sword blade. He walked with long strides along the terrace, and followed a road that turned into the forest, forgetting the monotonous treadmill of his thoughts, in the flush that the fast walking sent through his whole body, in the rustling silence of the woods, where the moss on the north side of the boles of the trees was emerald, and where the sky was soft grey through a lavender lacework of branches. The green, gnarled woods made him think of the last act of Pelléas. With his tunic unbuttoned and his shirt open at the neck, and his hands stuck deep in his pockets, he went along whistling like a schoolboy. After an hour he came out of the woods on a high road, where he found himself walking beside a two-wheeled cart that kept pace with him exactly, try as he would to get ahead of it. After a while a boy leaned out. "Eh, l'Américain! Vous voulez monter?" "Where are you going?" "Conflans Sainte-Honorine." "Where's that?" The boy flourished his whip vaguely towards the horse's head. "All right," said Andrews. "These are potatoes," said the boy. "Make yourself comfortable." Andrews offered him a cigarette, which he took with muddy fingers. He had a broad face, red cheeks and chunky features. Reddish brown hair escaped spikily from under a mud-spattered beret. "Where did you say you were going?" "Conflans Sainte-Honorine. Silly all these saints, aren't they?" Andrews laughed. "Where are you going?" the boy asked. "I don't know. I was taking a walk." The boy leaned over to Andrews and whispered in his ear: "Deserter?" "No. I had a day off and wanted to see the country." "I just thought, if you were a deserter I might be able to help you. Must be silly to be a soldier. Dirty life. But you like the country. So do I. You can't call this country. I'm not from this part. I'm from Brittany. There we have real country. It's stifling near Paris here. So many people, so many houses." "It seems mighty fine to me." "That's because you're a soldier. Better than barracks, huh? Dirty life, that. I'll never be a soldier. I'm going into the navy, merchant marine, and then if I have to do service, I'll do it on the sea." "I suppose it is pleasanter." "There's more freedom. And the sea. We Bretons, you know, we all die of the sea or of liquor." They laughed. "Have you been long in this part of the country?" asked Andrews. 6 months. It's very dull, this farming work. I'm head of a gang in a fruit orchard, but not for long. I have a brother shipped on a sailing vessel. When he comes back to Bordeaux, I'll ship out on the same boat." "Where to?" "South America, Peru. How should I know?" "I'd like to ship on a sailing vessel," said Andrews. "You would? It seems very fine to me to travel and see new countries. And perhaps I shall stay over there." "Where?" "How should I know? If I like it, that is. Life is very bad in Europe." "It is stifling, I suppose," said Andrews slowly. "All these nations, all these hatreds. But still, it is very beautiful. Life is very ugly in America." "Let's have something to drink. There's a bistro." The boy jumped down from the cart and tied the horse to a tree. They went into a small wine shop with a counter and one square oak table. "But won't you be late?" said Andrews. "I don't care. I like talking, don't you?" "Yes, indeed." They ordered wine of an old woman in a green apron, who had 3 yellow teeth that protruded from her mouth when she spoke. "I haven't had anything to eat," said Andrews. "Wait a minute." The boy ran out to the cart and came back with a canvas bag from which he took half a loaf of bread and some cheese. "My name's Marcel," the boy said when they had sat for a while sipping wine. "Mine is Jean, Jean Andre." "Ah, I have a brother named Jean, and my father's name is Andre. That's pleasant, isn't it?" "But it must be a splendid job working in a fruit orchard," said Andrews, munching bread and cheese. "It's well paid, but you get tired of being in one place all the time. It's not as it is in Brittany." Marcel paused. He sat, rocking a little on the stool, holding on to the seat between his legs. A curious brilliance came into his grey eyes. "There," he went on in a soft voice, "it is so quiet in the fields, and from every hill you look at the sea. I like that, don't you?" He turned to Andrews with a smile. "You are lucky to be free," said Andrews bitterly. He felt as if he would burst into tears. "But you will be demobilized soon. The butchery is over. You will go home to your family. That will be good, eh?" "I wonder. It's not far enough away. Restless." "What do you expect?" A fine rain was falling. They climbed in on the potato sacks and the horse started a jog trot. Its lanky brown shanks glistened a little from the rain. "Do you come out this way often?" asked Marcel. "I shall. It's the nicest place near Paris." "Some Sunday you must come out and I'll take you round. The castle is very fine. And then there is Malmaison, where the great Emperor lived with the Empress Josephine." Andrews suddenly remembered Jeanne's card. This was Wednesday. He pictured her dark figure among the crowd of the pavement in front of the Cafe de Rohan. Of course it had to be that way. Despair, so helpless as to be almost sweet, came over him. "And girls," he said to Marcel, "are they pretty round here?" Marcel shrugged his shoulders. "It's not women that we lack, if a fellow has money," he said. Andrews felt a sense of shame, he did not exactly know why. "My brother writes that in South America the women are very brown and very passionate," added Marcel with a wistful smile. "But travelling and reading books, that's what I like. But look, if you want to take the train back to Paris." Marcel pulled up the horse to a standstill. "If you want to take the train, cross that field by the footpath and keep right along the road, to the left, till you come to the river. There's a ferryman. The town's Herblay, and there's a station. And any Sunday before noon I'll be at 3 rue des Evêques, Reuil. You must come and we'll take a walk together." They shook hands, and Andrews strode off across the wet fields. Something strangely sweet and wistful that he could not analyse lingered in his mind from Marcel's talk. Somewhere, beyond everything, he was conscious of the great free rhythm of the sea. Then he thought of the major's office that morning, and of his own skinny figure in the mirrors, repeated endlessly, standing helpless and humble before the shining mahogany desk. Even out here in these fields where the wet earth seemed to heave with the sprouting of new growth he was not free. In those office buildings with white marble halls full of the clank of officers' heels, in index cards and piles of typewritten papers, his real self, which they had power to kill if they wanted to, was in his name and his number on lists with millions of other names and other numbers. This sentient body of his, full of possibilities and hopes and desires, was only a pale ghost that depended on the other self, that suffered for it and cringed for it. He could not drive out of his head the picture of himself, skinny, in an ill-fitting uniform, repeated endlessly in the two mirrors of the major's white painted office. All of a sudden, through bare poplar trees, he saw the Seine. He hurried along the road, splashing now and then in a shining puddle, until he came to a landing place. The river was very wide, silvery, streaked with pale green and violet and straw color from the evening sky. Opposite were bare poplars, and behind them clusters of buff-colored houses climbing up a green hill to a church, all repeated upside down in the color-streaked river. The river was very full and welled up above its banks, the way the water stands up above the rim of a glass filled too full. From the water came an indefinable rustling, flowing sound that rose and fell with quiet rhythm in Andrews's ears. Andrews forgot everything in the great wave of music that rose impetuously through him, poured with the hot blood through his veins, with the streaked colors of the river and the sky through his eyes, with the rhythm of the flowing river through his ears. 5. "So I came without," said Andrews, laughing. "What fun!" cried Genevieve. "But anyway, they couldn't do anything to you. Chartres is so near. It's at the gates of Paris." They were alone in the compartment. The train had pulled out of the station and was going through suburbs where the trees were in leaf in the gardens and fruit trees foamed above the red brick walls among the box-like villas. "Anyway," said Andrews, "it was an opportunity not to be missed." "That must be one of the most amusing things about being a soldier, avoiding regulations. I wonder whether Damocles didn't really enjoy his sword, don't you think so?" They laughed. "But mother was very doubtful about my coming with you this way. She's such a dear, she wants to be very modern and liberal, but she always gets frightened at the last minute. And my aunt will think the world's end has come when we appear." They went through some tunnels, and when the train stopped at Sèvres, had a glimpse of the Seine valley, where the blue mist made a patina over the soft pea green of new leaves. Then the train came out on wide plains, full of the glaucous shimmer of young oats and the golden green of fresh sprinkled wheat fields, where the mist on the horizon was purplish. The train's shadow, blue, sped along beside them over the grass and fences. "How beautiful it is to go out of the city this way in the early morning. Has your aunt a piano?" "Yes, a very old and tinkly one." "It would be amusing to play you all I have done at the Queen of Sheba. You say the most helpful things." "It is that I'm interested. I think you will do something some day." Andrews shrugged his shoulders. They sat silent, their ears filled up by the jerking rhythm of wheels over rails, now and then looking at each other almost furtively. Outside, fields and hedges and patches of blossom, and poplar trees faintly powdered with green, unrolled like a screen before them, behind the nicker of telegraph poles and the festooned wires on which the sun gave glints of red copper. Andrews discovered all at once that the coppery glint on the telegraph wires was the same as the glint in Genevieve's hair. Berenike, Artemisia, Arsinoe, the names lingered in his mind. So that as he looked out of the window at the long curves of the telegraph wires that seemed to rise and fall as they glided past, he could imagine her face, with its large pale brown eyes and its small mouth and broad smooth forehead, suddenly stilled into the encaustic painting on the mummy case of some Alexandrian girl. "Tell me," she said, "when did you begin to write music?" Andrews brushed the light, disordered hair off his forehead. "Why, I think I forgot to brush my hair this morning," he said. "You see, I was so excited by the idea of coming to Chartres with you." They laughed. "But my mother taught me to play the piano when I was very small," he went on seriously. "She and I lived alone in an old house belonging to her family in Virginia. How different all that was from anything you have ever lived. It would not be possible in Europe to be as isolated as we were in Virginia. Mother was very unhappy. She had led a dreadfully thwarted life. That unrelieved hopeless misery that only a woman can suffer. She used to tell me stories, and I used to make up little tunes about them, and about anything. The great success," he laughed, "was, I remember, 'To a Dandelion.' I can remember so well the way mother pursed her lips up as she leaned over the writing desk. She was very tall, and as it was dark in our old sitting room, had to lean far over to see. She used to spend hours making beautiful copies of tunes I made up. My mother is the only person who has ever really had any importance in my life. But I lack technical training terribly." "Do you think it is so important?" said Genevieve, leaning towards him to make herself heard above the clatter of the train. "Perhaps it is. I don't know. I think it always comes sooner or later, if you feel intensely enough. But it is frightful to feel all you want to express getting away beyond you. An idea comes into your head and you feel it grow stronger and stronger and you can't grasp it. You have no means to express it. It's like standing on a street corner and seeing a gorgeous procession go by without being able to join it, or like opening a bottle of beer and having it foam all over you without having a glass to pour it into." Genevieve burst out laughing. "But you can drink from the bottle, can't you?" she said, her eyes sparkling. "I'm trying to," said Andrews. "Here we are. There's the cathedral. No, it's hidden," cried Genevieve. They got to their feet. As they left the station, Andrews said: "But after all, it's only freedom that matters. When I'm out of the army..." "Yes, I suppose you are right. For you, that is. The artist should be free from any sort of entanglement." "I don't see what difference there is between an artist and any other sort of workman," said Andrews savagely. "No, but look." From the square where they stood, above the green blur of a little park, they could see the cathedral, creamy yellow and rust color, with the sober tower and the gaudy tower and the great rose window between, the whole pile standing nonchalantly, knee deep in the packed roofs of the town. They stood shoulder to shoulder, looking at it without speaking. In the afternoon they walked down the hill towards the river that flowed through a quarter of tottering, peak-gabled houses and mills, from which came a sound of grinding wheels. Above them, towering over gardens full of pear trees in bloom, the apse of the cathedral bulged against the pale blue sky. On a narrow and very ancient bridge they stopped and looked at the water, full of a shimmering of blue and green and grey from the sky and from the vivid new leaves of the willow trees along the bank. Their senses glutted with the beauty of the day and the intricate magnificence of the cathedral, languid with all they had seen and said, they were talking of the future with quiet voices. "It's all in forming a habit of work," Andrews was saying. "You have to be a slave to get anything done. It's all a question of choosing your master, don't you think so?" "Yes, I suppose all the men who have left their imprint on people's lives have been slaves in a sense," said Genevieve slowly. "Everyone has to give up a great deal of life to live anything deeply. But it's worth it." She looked Andrews full in the eyes. "Yes, I think it's worth it," said Andrews. "But you must help me. Now I am like a man who has come up out of a dark cellar. I'm almost too dazzled by the gorgeousness of everything. But at least I am out of the cellar." "Look, a fish jumped," cried Genevieve. "I wonder if we could hire a boat anywhere. Don't you think it'd be fun to go out in a boat?" A voice broke in on Genevieve's answer. "Let's see your pass, will you?" Andrews turned round. A soldier with a round brown face and red cheeks stood beside him on the bridge. Andrews looked at him fixedly. A little zigzag scar above his left eye showed white on his heavily tanned skin. "Let's see your pass," the man said again. He had a high-pitched, squeaky voice. Andrews felt the blood thumping in his ears. "Are you an M.P.?" "Yes." "Well, I'm in the Sorbonne detachment." "What the hell's that?" said the M.P., laughing thinly. "What does he say?" asked Genevieve, smiling. "Nothing. I'll have to go to see the officer and explain," said Andrews in a breathless voice. "You go back to your aunt's and I'll come as soon as I've arranged it." "No, I'll come with you." "Please go back. It may be serious." "I'll come as soon as I can," said Andrews harshly. She walked up the hill with swift, decisive steps, without turning round. "Tough luck, buddy," said the M.P. "She's a good looker. I'd like to have a half hour with her myself." "Look here, I'm in the Sorbonne School Detachment in Paris, and I came down here without a pass. Is there anything I can do about it?" "They'll fix you up, don't worry," cried the M.P. shrilly. "You ain't a member of the General Staff in disguise, are ya? School Detachment. Gee, but won't Bill Huggis laugh when he hears that. You pulled the best one yet, buddy. But come along," he added in a confidential tone. "If you come quiet I won't put the handcuffs on you." "How do I know you're an M.P.?" You'll know soon enough." They turned down a narrow street between grey stucco walls leprous with moss and water stains. At a chair inside the window of a small wine shop, a man with a red M.P. badge sat smoking. He got up when he saw them pass and opened the door with one hand on his pistol holder. "I got one bird, Bill," said the man, shoving Andrews roughly in the door. "Good for you, Handsome. Is he quiet?" Handsome grunted. "Sit down there. If you move you'll get a bullet in your guts." The M.P. stuck out a square jaw. He had a sallow skin, puffy under his eyes that were grey and lustreless. "He says he's in some goddam school detachment. First time that's been pulled, ain't it?" "School detachment. Do you mean an O.T.C.?" Bill sank laughing into his chair by the window, spreading his legs out over the floor. "Ain't that rich?" said Handsome, laughing shrilly again. "Got any papers on you? You must have some sort of papers." Andrews searched his pockets. He flushed. "I ought to have a school pass." "You sure ought. Gee, this guy's simple," said Bill, leaning far back in the chair and blowing smoke through his nose. "Look at his dog tag, Handsome." The man strode over to Andrews and jerked open the top of his tunic. Andrews pulled his body away. "I haven't got any on. I forgot to put any on this morning." "No tag, no insignia." "Yes, I have, infantry." "No papers, no papers. I bet he's been out a hell of a time," said Handsome meditatively. "Better put the cuffs on him," said Bill in the middle of a yawn. "Let's wait a while. When's the loot comin'?" "Not till night." "Sure?" "Yes, ain't no train." "How about a sidecar?" "No, I know he ain't comin'," snarled Bill. "Well, what do you say we have a little liquor, Bill? Bet this bloke's got money. You'll set us up to a glass of cognac, won't you, school detachment?" Andrews sat very stiff in his chair, staring at them. "Yes," he said. "Order up what you like." "Keep an eye on him, Handsome. You never can tell what this quiet kind's likely to pull off on you." Bill Huggis strode out of the room with heavy steps. In a moment he came back swinging a bottle of cognac in his hand. "Told the madame you'd pay, Skinny," said the man as he passed Andrews's chair. Andrews nodded. The two M.P.s drew up to the table beside which Andrews sat. Andrews could not keep his eyes off them. Bill Huggis hummed as he pulled the cork out of the bottle. "It's the smile that makes you happy, it's the smile that makes you sad." Handsome watched him grinning. Suddenly they both burst out laughing. "And the damn fool thinks he's in a school battalion," said Handsome in his shrill voice. "It'll be another kind of battalion you'll be in, Skinny," cried Bill Huggis. He stifled his laughter with a long drink from the bottle. He smacked his lips. "Not so goddam bad," he said. Then he started humming again. "It's the smile that makes you happy, it's the smile that makes you sad." "Have some, Skinny?" said Handsome, pushing the bottle towards Andrews. "No, thanks," said Andrews. "You won't be getting good cognac where you're going, Skinny, not by a damn sight," growled Bill Huggis in the middle of a laugh. "All right, I'll take a swig." An idea suddenly came into Andrews's head. "Gee, the bastard can drink cognac," cried Handsome. "Got enough money to buy us another bottle?" Andrews nodded. He wiped his mouth absently with the handkerchief. He had drunk the raw cognac without tasting it. "Get another bottle, Handsome," said Bill Huggis carelessly. A purplish flush had appeared in the lower part of his cheeks. When the other man came back he burst out laughing. "The last cognac this skinny guy from the detachment'll get for many a day. Better drink up strong, Skinny. They don't have that stuff down on the farm. School detachment, I'll be goddamned." He leaned back in his chair, shaking with laughter. Handsome's face was crimson. Only the zigzag scar over his eye remained white. He was swearing in a low voice as he worked the cork out of the bottle. Andrews could not keep his eyes off the men's faces. They went from one to the other in spite of him. Now and then, for an instant, he caught a glimpse of the yellow and brown squares of the wallpaper and the bar with a few empty bottles behind it. He tried to count the bottles. 1, 2, 3. But he was staring in the lustreless grey eyes of Bill Huggis, who lay back in his chair, blowing smoke out of his nose, now and then reaching for the cognac bottle, all the while humming faintly under his breath: "It's the smile that makes you happy, it's the smile that makes you sad." Handsome sat with his elbows on the table and his chin in his beefy hands. His face was flushed crimson, but the skin was softly molded, like a woman's. The light in the room was beginning to grow grey. Handsome and Bill Huggis stood up. A young officer, with clearly marked features and a campaign hat worn a little on one side, came in, stood with his feet wide apart in the middle of the floor. Andrews went up to him. "I'm in the Sorbonne detachment, Lieutenant, stationed in Paris." "Don't you know enough to salute?" said the officer, looking him up and down. "One of you men teach him how to salute," he said slowly. Handsome made a step towards Andrews and hit him with his fist between the eyes. There was a flash of light and the room swung round, and there was a splitting crash as his head struck the floor. He got to his feet. The fist hit him in the same place, blinding him. The three figures and the bright oblong of the window swung round. A chair crashed down with him, and a hard rap on the back of his skull brought momentary blackness. "That's enough. Let 'em be," he heard a voice far away at the end of a black tunnel. A great weight seemed to be holding him down as he struggled to get up, blinded by tears and blood. Rending pains darted like arrows through his head. There were handcuffs on his wrists. "Get up," snarled a voice. He got to his feet. Faint light came through the streaming tears in his eyes. His forehead flamed as if hot coals were being pressed against it. "Prisoner, attention!" shouted the officer's voice. "March!" Automatically Andrews lifted one foot and then the other. He felt in his face the cool air of the street. On either side of him were the hard steps of the M.P.'s. Within him a nightmare voice was shrieking, shrieking. End of section 14.